Thank you for the introduction. There's a couple little things I'll mention here about myself. So I think most of you, not all of you, but most of you I have met on multiple occasions. There's a couple faces that I met for the first time today. This kind of got started for me in technology because I have, my whole career has been in information security and technology. And then as we started a family and had 3 children, being keenly aware of the risks that exist out there, this became an interest, obviously, because this is the environment that my children are being raised in, where they have access to these things. And so the 3 children I have, ranging from 14 through 17, so that gives me 2 Gen Z children and 1 Gen Alpha maybe / Gen Z. He's on the border, I'm not really sure. I think he wants to be Gen Z, I'm not sure. That depends on which study you read, whether he's a Gen Z or he's a Gen Alpha there. So, but my career has been in information security, and I have been doing that since the 1900s. And so we're going to be covering the three sessions that was mentioned. Here's what our topics are going to be on. The first one's going to be parenting in the digital age. The second topic is going to be social media and your child's mental and spiritual health. And the third is how to protect your children online. And that's going to be kind of a semi-technical discussion. And so as was stated, if you have any questions as we're going through this, raise your hand, ask the question, because I want this to be interactive. I want this to be beneficial for you and not just me droning on for 45-minute clips here. So. The first thing is the role of parents has not changed. The only difference is the landscape has changed. So the responsibility of parents have been raising their children in faith and wisdom and character. Like, your job is to bring that child up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, to raise them, to give them back to God that they might get to heaven, and that along the way that they are productive members of society, that they are good people all around. And so that's what your great-grandparents' concern was for your grandparents. That's what your grandparents' concern was for your parents. That's what your parents' concern was for you. And that's what your concern is for your children and or grandchildren. And so as we look at that, digital technology, I think sometimes when we think about well, I don't know anything about that. Digital technology doesn't replace, doesn't make it so you can't parent your child. It just changes how you have to parent. It's a different landscape. Sometimes these tools, while they're very helpful, can also be used to augment parenting. And I'll give you an example of maybe not a great example. We were out to dinner one evening, and the table that was sitting right here, it was a table of 4 or 5, and it was a mom and a dad, 2 or 3 kids, I don't remember how many there were, and every single one of them looked like this at the dinner table. Yeah. And nobody was saying a word to anyone. No one was talking. And Sabrina made the comment to me. She pointed it out. And so it really does impact the family interaction. And it can also, you'll see where parents will give a young child a tablet of some sort to entertain them, to keep the kid quiet. Because it is it's a pacifier, if you will. It distracts them and gets them focused on that. And so our job, as we're going through this, our job is to bring up our children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And so technology is just a tool. Sometimes it's demonized. We're like, oh, technology is bad, it's terrible. I do not suggest that we go and live like the Amish. But I also think that we need to be aware of the dangers that exist out there. And so you have people on all ends of the spectrum. Sometimes they're terrified of anything to do with technology. All technology is evil. My kid's going to have nothing. I'm not giving you any technology. Or you have the parent that's like, it's no big deal. Give them anything and everything at the youngest of ages. And so we're going to look through some of those. So, and there really is you think about the shift of how when we were raised. So everybody in this room, except for my children, I think it looks like. So everybody in this room was raised in an environment that is different than the environment that my children are being raised in. And so we had I'll say, limited access to media. You did not carry around a smartphone in your pocket as a child. If you watched television, it was when you came home, and you only had it when mom and dad let you watch television at home. Now, maybe they just gave it free rein and you came home. You probably had more outdoor activities. You probably had much more interpersonal activities as you're working with friends and individuals. And your parents monitored your actions. They knew where you were at. So my parents knew whose house I was going to be at. Now, there was some free rein that was going on, like I'm riding my bike around the neighborhood. Now, she didn't really know. My mom didn't really know exactly where I was. And if she knew that I rode as far as I rode, then she would be shocked at some of that, right? So there was some things that I'm doing that my parents aren't exactly aware of. And that's going to happen today in a digital sense, is that your kids are going to go places you don't know that they're going to be. They're going to go further than you think they're going to go. And the idea is how do you help guide them through this process? So I'll tell you what my parents did. They said, hey, do not cross this road. You have to stay on this side of the road. Okay, so now they have set up guardrails for me. Now, could I have crossed over that road? Well, I could have. I didn't because I was a good, obedient child. Now, did my parents verify that? Well, there was no GPS trackers back then. They didn't know. Now, I did obey what they asked. I stayed on my side of the road, and so they could find me. Now, they might have to hunt for me, but they knew about where I was at. If I'm staying at someone's house, they knew whose house it was. They knew the parents. They knew the kids. So when we think about, in a digital sense, as our children and grandchildren are digital nomads, they're wandering out there in the world, how do we provide the protection for them so that they don't wander across something that they should not wander across and go somewhere where they shouldn't? So it's kind of that shift of the interactions that kids have today are more on the digital side than they are on the interpersonal side. They interact with their friends who sit right next to them through their phone. I don't know, perhaps maybe you sat on the couch and you and your spouse may have sent memes back and forth over the phone or something along those lines, interacting in a digital sense with someone who is in the same room with you. And so perhaps we might see some of that and think about children who that's all they've grown up with. That's the only interaction. Okay, so we just need to make sure that we keep that in mind. So our job as parents is to guide our children in whatever environment it is. So I think about my grandmother. My grandmother, who she passed a number of years ago, but she was born in 1913. So she got to see the Great Depression. She was born before the first commercial flight was made of airlines. Less than 10 years after the Wright brothers flew the first airplane. So we're talking, think about the environment she grew up in. And her parents had the same concern that I have for my children. Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 through 7, there's an instruction made, and this one's a little more than 100 years old. This one's quite old. And in Deuteronomy chapter 6, here's what it says. And the words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and you shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. God has given the instruction to the parents there in Deuteronomy that you are to instill His commands in them from an early age all the way through. And it's not just when you went to synagogue. It wasn't just when you went there on the Sabbath day to go hear some Levite tell you something. It is your responsibility to teach them diligently to your children. Not casually, diligently to your children. And to do so all the time, when you're sitting down in the house, when you're walking by the way, when you're doing anything, when you're getting up, when you're going to bed, every single instance. And so it never really goes away, and so these principles remain the same. So when we look at setting boundaries in a digital world, what I want us to think about for a moment is, I told you that my parents gave me a don't ride past this point. But they also told me when they wanted me home. So my job was to be home. So I had the sweetest Casio watch. It was one of those little digital ones, right, that I could have a stopwatch on there. And that was the watch I wore. So I had to be home either by a certain time that my mom said, dinner's going to be ready by X, I need you home before then. Or if we had already eaten and it was, the summertime and I could go run outside after that, which I was eager to do, then I would go and ride my bike for an extended period of time. I had to be home, but by the time, when the street lights come on, I'm coming home, okay? Or there was a time that my mom would set for me, and that's where I would be. So the equivalent today is I'm limiting the screen time that my children have. Now, how much time does your child or your grandchild or the children who are at the church, how much time do they spend on their phone, on their device? Do you know how much time they spend on their device? Better yet, and we'll look at it a little bit later, how much time do you spend on your device? How many times do you pick up your phone? How much time do you spend on social media or those kinds of things? So the equivalent is limit the screen time and know where your child is online, and let technology serve the family. So the difference between generations is stark, and I think that's something that goes on that we don't really appreciate as much as we could or should. So when you think about Gen Z, so Gen Zs are born from 1997 to 2012. And they are, and Gen Alphas are born from about 2013 forward, ish. And so they grew up only with the internet. They never knew life without the internet. When I grew up, I didn't have the internet. I didn't have the internet until I was in high school. It didn't even really exist. When America Online came out, and they would send out those floppy disks that they would send out in the mail, and they would give you, 100 free hours of the internet or something like that, and you had that really great modem that would make that sound that we can all hear in our head right now as it was dialing up and connecting. And so that was how, that's right, that's exactly what it sounded like. So as you connected there, the internet was a significantly different place than what it is today. I grew up and had no internet. Then in high school, I get the internet. And so the way that I process information, the way that I deal with individuals, the way that I consume media is different than how my children consume it. They have never known a world in which they not only did they not have internet, but let's move another step, that they did not have a smartphone accessible to them. Think about it. If you had a question, you had to go, where did you have to go to look up a question? If somebody said, you went to the library and then you went and either looked it up in a book, or maybe if your parents had subscribed, you may have even had one of those like the World Book Encyclopedias or the Britannicas or something like that. I didn't have the Britannicas. That was the people down the street. I only had the World Book. We had the second tier now, right? But if you wanted to have an answer to something, you had to go to a book and figure that out. Now, it doesn't matter what the question is, we're looking it up to figure it out on the phone instantaneously. So the way that they process information is different. And because of that, they also have been trained by their environment to consume media differently. Instead of reading content, they're much more watching videos, listening to the audio, maybe reading it while it goes along, and watching short clips. Instead of sitting down and reading a long book or something along those lines, it's very much in short clips of 20-second clips, 15-second clips, 30-second clips. And so it trains you to have a superficial understanding of something very briefly, and you take it in very small nuggets over and over and over. That's the mode of how they do it. And so that's why YouTube and TikTok are so popular. You sit there on YouTube Shorts or TikToks. I can tell you that we'll talk a little bit about TikTok in the second session. But so I have been on TikTok briefly, part of it mostly for research, and then I had enough of it. But on YouTube, I do use YouTube. It is, for me, it is a great tool. I want to replace, I need to fix something on my truck. All I simply do is pull up YouTube, I type it in, and there's somebody working on the same year truck as mine, and he's taking me a step-by-step process through how to fix it, so I don't have to figure it out myself. So I just pause and do what he did, and pause and do what he did, and now I've done exactly the same thing. And so it's very helpful, but also you get into reels and shorts, those little videos, and you watch one, and then you scroll to the next one, and then you begin doom scrolling as you've gone through and spent hours looking through it. So and I see several of you smiling and nodding because you've fallen victim to this. Now I'm talking to you as adults. You guys have all this maturity and all this self-control, and you have all these years of experience and wisdom, and we're grinning because we realize how susceptible that we are to this. And then we hand it to a child who has yet to exercise a great deal of self-control, hasn't learned to self-restraint, hasn't had those years of experience, and I'm handing them something that gives me a hard time of stepping away from it, and I'm giving it to a child, and that's what they're doing. So it creates a shorter attention span. Now I'm going to play a little game. Anyone want to guess what now there was a study, of course, you can find a study that says anything, but anyone want to guess what the attention span for a Gen Z individual is? What's the attention span?
30 seconds.
30 seconds is incorrect. Far too high, sir. I should have just said 20 seconds. Well, we've cut it by a third and still too high. 15, you're still too high. 10 is still too high. 8 seconds. 8 seconds. Now I want you to think about, and I didn't list all of them out for what Gen X is and what that goes through. When you think about that, how we used to interact and what attention spans are, you want to keep somebody's attention. If you have to every 8 seconds give me a dopamine hit to get me to pay attention, it's going to be really hard to teach people and to have interaction with somebody when I can't pay attention to you for more than 8 seconds. What it's done is our ability to focus and concentrate has become atrophied, weakened because of the way that we consume, and our children are being raised up that way. We were driving from Florida here yesterday, and one of my children, who shall not be named, was in the car and was complaining about the fact that they were bored out of their mind because they didn't. So is there a way, can we do this? And so really it is, so this is what they were saying without saying the words. Can you entertain me? I don't want to be bored. Can you turn on some music I want to listen to? I want to watch this video. Can you make some, I want to look at, and so when you think about that's boredom is where creativity comes from. And our ability to I keep getting a feedback zone everywhere I'm at here. Turn me down just a little bit. I keep trying to find. This is about the only place I can stand here. If I stand like this, I'm okay. So the other thing that we have to realize is that when you're online on TikTok and YouTube, there is an influence there. So when your child is young, who is the greatest influence in their life? The parents, right? You are their greatest influence. And then moving up beyond that, then maybe they might look up to an older sibling or something along those lines. And so those are the people who they're around. Then they go off to school perhaps. Let's say that you send them off to school. Now who has greater influence in many instances? Now it's all the people, it's all their friends around them and that teacher who's with them for 8 hours a day. Now when they're home with you, they're sleeping, and then they've got to do some homework and got to go do some other place. So what happens is you have limited now your interaction, your influence on your child starting at that age. And if you would like to give away more of your influence, hand them a smartphone. Because now what you've done is you've given all of your influence away to them, because now this is what's going to be influencing. In fact, people make a living online in the role of influencers. They make millions of dollars a year being an influencer. Now, if you know that there are people who publicly proclaim, my job is to be an influencer, and then you hand a child a front row ticket to that influencer, what do you think is going to happen to that child? They're going to be influenced. They're going to pick that up. Now, have you seen these influencers? Do you know what they're influencing your child to do and to say and to act? Do you see how they dress and the things that they advocate? And if you go, well, I don't really know, well, you should, because I'll tell you, my parents knew who my friends were. They knew who I talked to on the phone, that thing that was connected to the wall that you would pull off there. My parents knew who I talked with. They knew who I hung out with.
Do you know who your children or grandchildren, do you know who they're influenced by online? Do you know who they interact with? And so as a parent, we have to know that, because here they are, as they're preferring this content, as they're consuming it in this way, this is the influence. And so they don't, our job is to help them along. And the other issue is you also have the issue of technology addiction. Think about a child. So the average U.S. teen, how many hours do you suppose the average teen spends online? Pardon me? 8 to 9 hours. Oh, I put it up there. I was reading off the other slide. Oh boy. Never mind. This ruined. I didn't have this. I changed my slides and this messed. Okay, so 8. That's great. You guys knew exactly what the answer was. That's incredible. So here they are being influenced 8 to 9 hours, and then they're away from you with their friends. And so how much time do you have? If they sleep for 8 hours and they're on their phone for 8 to 9 hours, and then they're at the school for 4 or 5 hours, how much time do you actually have of influence in your children's life or your grandchild's life? Now, I want you to think for a moment, if our job is to get our children to heaven, how is that actually going to occur? If are we doing it are we influencing them when we wake up and when we sit down in our house and when we walk by the way and when we is that what we're doing? Well, if I have no influence or I've given all my influence, we have to realize, wait a minute, time out. We need to spend some time together as a family. My job is to get my children back to heaven. So how am I going to do that? And you look at children under 8 spending 2.5 hours. Under 8. Spending 2.5 hours on a device. There is no reason why a child needs to be spending 2.5 hours, why a child needs to be spending 8 or 9 hours on a device. And this excessive screen time. So here, we could spend days going down this path, but there are studies talking about how this type of consumption of social media rewires the brain of children. And I say rewires, it just initially wires the brain. So what it does is it decreases that attention span, which we talked about, and it also decreases impulse control, their ability to exercise self-control. So we're raising children who have short attention spans and no impulse control, and then we're feeding them all sorts of influence from people who are not godly. A recipe for disaster. And you look at what children's attention. So this dopamine-driven feedback loop that goes on and on and on in games. In fact, they gamify everything. How many extra points? Like, I'll give you an example. Starbucks. Anybody here ever drink Starbucks? Anyone? Nobody drinks Starbucks. Okay, everybody drinks Starbucks. Okay, so at Starbucks, do you guys have the app? You have the Starbucks app? No, you're missing out. I'm telling you, you're missing out. And here's why you're missing out on Starbucks, because they've got it's like a game. And when you spend more money with them, you get more stars. And the more stars you get, the more, like I get an extra pump of vanilla syrup in my drink, or I might get a free sweet treat along the side, or I might get a whole free drink along that way. And so then I'm encouraged, make sure I use my app. And then, so they know that, and it's gamifying things. And so that dopamine-driven feedback loop and apps and games create addictive behaviors. And we'll talk about that when we look at the mental health impact, but we just have to realize that these are the risks that are going on. Another thing that's a very serious concern is a loss of privacy. When you think about your childhood, did anybody here ever make a mistake in your childhood? Anyone? Anybody do anything they regret when they were a kid, teenager, make a maybe one bad decision or two, perhaps? Now let me ask you, what if there was some record of that? Like there was a picture of you behaving in a way that you should not have behaved in. Or something along those lines. And it was posted in the local newspaper on the front page. How do you feel about that now? And in fact, it's out there, now it's been placed where it never goes away. If everything that you ever did never went away, every bad decision that you made that was publicized never went away. This is the environment. So that loss of privacy and oversharing. I teach a class at the Graduate School of Banking at LSU. And in that class, I talk about phishing. And part of that, I talk about how this isn't a fishing class, but when you talk about fishing or spear fishing, that's where I'm going to go after Daniel. I'm going after him specifically. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to look him up on social media, and I'm going to look up his children, and I'm going to look up his wife. And then I'm going to see what's being shared. And then there's a picture. Oh, look at this. Daniel has a dark blue Chrysler Pacifica. Okay, so now I know what type of vehicle he drives. And happy anniversary, honey. That was a great 25 years. So now I know when they were married. I know their anniversary. Happy birthday, Daniel. Happy 50th birthday, Daniel. And so now I know when his birthday is. And I know when her birthday is. So now I know the date they were born. I know the address that they live at. I know what vehicles they have. I know their children's names. I know what schools their children go to. I know. And so you use this information. And so on a phishing stand, the bad guys will use that to send you something to entice you. But my question is as we overshare this, all of this personal data is used ultimately for marketing purposes, to sell you things. Now, we'll get to the next one, but these things have real-world consequences, the things that are being shared. 40% of teens in one study said that they regretted something they posted online. Now, you might think, well, I'll just delete that post. Nothing that you put online really ever goes away. It may be hard for you to find it, but it never goes away. Now, for me, there are things that I did when I was a teenager that I'm sorry for, and I repented for, and the Lord has forgiven me, and the world has forgotten. But that doesn't happen with children who put things online. They may repent of that, and they may be forgiven of that, but it never goes away. You can't get rid of it. And this is the kinds of things that we need to teach our children, not to share that personal information and how to control some of those things so it doesn't happen. We're going to move a little faster here. The next risk that you have, risks in digital age, is exposure to pornography. There's not a big surprise here. Back in the day, as they say, the only way that you were exposed to pornography is either someone you knew physically had a physical book that had it in it, or you went to a store that you went and purchased this. Not today. So then it moved to, you could do it from the privacy of your own computer at home. So parents said, okay, all the experts say, make sure you put a computer in the middle of the living room where no one can hide what they're looking at. Okay, that was really good when your computer was one of these big towers that was plugged in with a screen. Now, this is your computer. Where does this go? Make sure that it only stays out in now that changes. The whole world changes. So some interesting statistics. Over half of children encounter pornography before the age of 13. I want you to think about your children, your grandchildren, the members of this church, the children who are in the school right down the street, whatever it is. If they're 13 years old, over half of them have been exposed to pornography. That is a failure of parenting. Now, I'm not saying that the parents are wholly responsible, that the child has, and there's lots of people there, but the very first exposure age at 11. Can you imagine being exposed to, and pornography in the 1960s is entirely different than, now it's all pornography, it's all sin, it's all terrible, but it has driven down to as vile as you can imagine it being, and you are not imagining it far vile enough. And this is what our 11-year-old is being exposed to. Things that warp the mind, things that turn our stomach. And so it creates all kinds of unrealistic views on what relationships look like and what individuals look like. And so there are all sorts of strategies, but we have to be willing to have conversations with our children to explain to them the risks that are associated with what they see and how do they deal with this. If I see something I shouldn't see, how do I interact with this? And if we're unwilling to have that conversation with our child, then we're not guiding them through this process. Social media and cyberbullying. 59% of children have experienced cyberbullying in one respect or another. And when these children have experienced this cyberbullying, they're much more likely to suffer from anxiety and or depression. Now before, in school, maybe when we were children, there was a bully, right? One or two bullies, we knew who they were, we could stay away from them. Now today, when I post things in a public sense, I have a world full of bullies that are just looking for people to pick on. And so instead of just avoiding that one kid, Or making sure that, how I navigate that situation. Oh, that's not the case online. And so these platforms where bullying is common is on Instagram and on TikTok, Snapchat. I was reading Snapchat as I was saying TikTok. TikTok, Snapchat, and Discord. And so when you look at these platforms, they have instant message. So you post something, and then on TikTok you can, or Instagram or any, you can go in there and direct message that person and talk with them. So what is the parent's response? How do you guide them through this process? Are you aware that this is even happening? Now, all of these things are impacted here. So you're on social media. I was going to post a picture. I forgot to put it in here. My apologies. There's a great picture. Everybody know who Steve Harvey is? Okay. Steve Harvey, there's a picture of him that someone ran through an Instagram beauty filter. And it looks ridiculous. Like, everybody knows what he looks like. You know what his facial features are. You know all that. And so it removed all of these wrinkles. It smoothed him all completely out. And it looks absurd. And so when our children see pictures and everybody looks perfect, you're not going to post a picture of you in a light that doesn't look good. So everybody posts only their very best life. They're only their very best side, only their very best pictures. So when you see that, look how much better they're doing than me. Look how much better they look than me. And so it impacts what body image and self-esteem. And then look how much they're always going to vacations. Look, here they're doing this, and here they're doing that. And look at the new clothes they bought. And so that impact of social media, they begin to think of themselves as maybe their self-worth becomes less, which then causes some depression. And so they compare themselves with these influencers whose job is to do nothing but present this one view. And so these edited images. And so there was a study. So Facebook purchased Instagram. Instagram really was acquired because Facebook was losing market share among young people. The only people who use Facebook are grandparents, great-grandparents, and maybe parents, right? So children do not use Facebook. They don't. So they're on Instagram, they're on TikTok, they're on a variety of other platforms. They're not on Facebook. So sometimes we view social media through the lens of what Facebook looks like. That's not what it is. So when they did a study, when Meta, the parent company to Facebook and Instagram, did a study, they identified that about a third of teenage girls felt worse about their bodies after they spent time on Instagram. Now, let's say you have a daughter or a granddaughter, and here they are, they're on a platform that the effect is a full 1/3 of the girls that are on there start to have body image issues. Is that really what we want our children to have to encounter? Because then you suddenly see, now there's causation and correlation, but you suddenly see an increase in bulimia and anorexia and a whole variety of other things because of the warping of this situation. Suicide and depression goes up. Suicide rates, here's a ridiculous statistic that I wrote up here as opposed to play the guessing game. Suicide went up by 200% in the last decade. Do you know what also occurred in the last decade? Social media. Now, I can't say that it's solely responsible for this, but when you have girls aged 10 to 14 killing themselves, there's a very real problem that occurs there. Boys' suicide rate, well, it only rose by 50%. Okay, any increase is ridiculous, but when you have 50% and 200%, you can see that our vulnerable children are being impacted. So there is a high, and we need to watch for these warning signs. There is a terrible, and we'll talk about it in the next session, there's a terrible thing, which is financial sextortion. And it's something that you don't really think about, but it started out as grooming, and there was some other things that go on, and now it's turned into full-blown sextortion. So what they do is they coerce minors into sending an inappropriate picture of themselves. So they start off and they say, hey, we have some mutual friends, you look cute, I'd like to be your friend. Okay, and so whether it be boy or girl, they're told, and so we'll talk some about some boys that have run victim of this here at the next session. But these cases, and what they do is they convince them, they send the child, your child or grandchild, they send them a picture of a minor who is in some various state of undress. And then they encourage the child to do the same back to them. Once they send a picture back to them, then they use this as leverage. Now, I'm going to send this to your mother and to your grandmother if you don't send me, another picture, a better picture. And by better, I don't mean better. I mean worse. Or I need you to send me money, thousands of dollars. So the cases of sextortion have tripled in the last 5 years. And so our children need to understand that while they think they're dealing with a teenage girl on the other end who is playing some video game with you and she's, hey, that is not who you're dealing with. You're not dealing with a teenage girl. You're dealing with someone who is trying to exploit you. And so our children need to be warned about the dangers of those interactions so they know, because it's hard not to know that. They need to be taught about deep fakes. And if you're not familiar with what a deep fake is, it's artificial intelligence's ability to make somebody or make a picture that didn't actually happen or a video that didn't actually happen. So we need to teach our children how to verify online content. We need to be present and engaged, and we need to make sure that we're involved, and it's not just rules. No, you can't go there. No, we need to be involved and engaged. And that comes through setting boundaries and setting time limits, enforcing time limits. For instance, no phones in the bedroom at night. So if you think about just that little example there, so would you, as a child, would your parents allow someone of the opposite sex to come over to your house and hang out in your bedroom with the door closed? I would hope not. I certainly would hope not. Would you let them go to the bathroom together? You would not. But if your child takes their cell phone into their bedroom at night or so we think about what we're allowing, because if you wouldn't allow it in person, why would you allow it virtually? Well, my child wouldn't do that. I'm sure that your child wouldn't. Nobody's child would ever do that, but children do it. And it leads to it. And so we need to make sure that we're doing the things that are necessary, that we're teaching discernment, how to know what's right and wrong, what's real and what's not real. I'll tell you, on Facebook, which is obviously the land of old people, there are a lot of people that cannot discern what is real news and what is fake news. The stuff that I see out there blows my mind that people post and believe because they lack discernment. How do you think that your teenager is going to navigate this if you can't navigate it? So we need to make sure that we're fostering open communication, that we're creating an environment where our children feel safe discussing their experiences. If you don't talk about it, it'll be okay, right? That's not how it needs to be. I need to have an interaction with my child that they feel comfortable, that they know these are the things that I encounter online. And how do I deal with it? So I'm their guide and not just an enforcer. That I'm helping them through this process. And secondly, that I'm modeling the behavior that I want my child to see. If your child looks at you or your grandchild looks at you, are you modeling the behavior that is appropriate? Or are you on your phone constantly, disengaged? Are you not involved with the family and you're doom scrolling constantly? Recognize your own weaknesses, and then we need to be mutually accountable. And basically, lastly, is that we respond to mistakes with grace. If your child is terrified that if they come to you and tell you, hey, I messed up here on this situation, whatever it is, and your response is going to be, I am so angry with you, and your child is more afraid of your response than they are of coming to you for guidance and help, you have not created a situation in which you are a good guide for your child. We're going to talk about some financial sextortion here next, and when we talk about that, it resulted in suicide in a number of children because it was better for them to kill themselves than it was for them to talk to their parent about the situation they found themselves in. We have to make sure that we foster an open environment where children can come to us and say, hey, I messed up. And if you mess up, okay, I love you. I'm going to help you get through this situation. We're going to get through it together. Not, You are not where the child feels like, oh, I can't deal with this. So children are going to make mistakes online. I asked you earlier, did anybody make a mistake? They're going to make a mistake, and it's probably going to be online, and it's probably going to be different than what you did, but it's still going to be bad, just like what we did wasn't good either. So as we use these teachable moments, the thing is you don't have to be an expert in technology. All you have to be is just an engaged parent. And so all of those risks, each and every one of them has a strategy to go and deal with. So the first session, that's the first session. Nobody had any questions through the process. I had to kind of speed up there towards the end. So if anybody has any questions, if not, our second subject, which will be here in about 10 minutes or so, is going to be looking at social media specifically and its impact on mental health and on your child's mental health and their spiritual health. So does anybody? Yes, sir.
You kind of alluded, you might talk to in the next section, but I'm just curious, you mentioned the sex exploitation, or what's
It's a sextortion, yeah. So you're extorting people with sexual content, kind
I
of.
find it difficult to think that a lot of these young kids, 13, 14, 15, really have access to any significant funds, which might lead them more to suicide, I would suspect.
That's right.
But how would they get access to these kind of funds? I mean, is that really a target?
So, so we will talk about sextortion. So to answer your question is what's happening is some of these kids have access. So they're trying to get, so like there were two guys that were arrested from Nigeria. So it's not people who are here in the United States that are always perpetrating it. There was one guy from Alabama that was arrested. There were two guys from Nigeria that were arrested. So it's all over the place. It's anyone who wants to prey on children. But they are, like the one kid that killed himself with the two guys from Nigeria, it was $3,000. Well, he didn't have access to $3,000. Now, if he did have that money, or he could get some of that money, so sometimes it's an unawareness of how much money a child has or doesn't have. And those guys, they just wanted money. Now, if the kid went to his parents and his parents said, okay, yeah, here's some money, and then they shipped it off, well, they got what they wanted. And so they really were pressuring the kid into trying to find and get the money however he could go and get it. And the kid felt hopeless because there's no way I can get $3,000 and it is completely no way I'm going to tell my parents about this. And so my only out for $3,000 and an inappropriate picture is for me to kill myself. Now, like this is, so we think about these things. I'm not saying every child's going to succumb to this, but we have to be aware of these things that are happening and how do we help them? So.
One of these challenges that you see kids get involved in is mind-blowing to me. They take risks that physical risks.
Sure. So when you think about taking risks, how aware of your personal safety were you when you were a teenager? Everyone was super cautious when they were a teenager, right? No one drove a car fast around corners that they shouldn't drive. No one maybe hitchhiked, depending on what generation you're in. Like in my generation, like the worst thing ever is to get in a car with somebody who you don't know. Like, don't do it. Well, the reason why they were telling my generation that is because the one right before it, everybody's thumbing a ride down the road. And then you had people taking advantage of that. The risks that people in the 60s and 70s and early 80s were taking by getting in cars with people. And then there were 3 or 4 murders, and suddenly it's this terrible situation and everybody's dying. Everybody wasn't dying, but it got some attention, and so people addressed that risk. So today, it's with this. It's getting some attention, so hopefully people are addressing that risk. Children do not assess risk appropriately, and they engage in inherently risky behavior because they don't know how to assess risk. And when they do that, then there's consequences, and that's where we as parents tell them, don't climb any higher in that tree. No, don't get in cars with strangers. Don't eat candy from strangers unless it's on Halloween. And so we have these kinds of things. So that's the kinds of things. So, okay. All right. Any other questions? All right. We'll take 10-minute break-ish. Where's there he is. Okay. All right. And then we'll come on back. So, okay.